This is Dynamyth-Busters, the video series where we put the technical side of Dynamics AX to the test, and as a bonus, we learn together along the way. Today we have collections. In this first episode of Dynamyth-Busters, we are going to talk about collections. Here you are a graph with a comparative of the 4 different collections that we are going to see today, and we are going to do a very quick introductions to them, to their characteristics. It's good to know the 4 of them because they are complementary. And yeah, let's start. The container is the only collection in XPP that can have, like, in the same variable, in the same object, different data types. It could be simple data types like a container with a string and an integer, or even a class with complex data types and, for example, records and so on. And you can have all of them in the same container. Neither lists, arrays, or sets can have that because they are strong typed. The only one that is not, and I say not dynamic, is the arrays, but we need to say containers are actually not dynamic, but they are handled like if they were dynamic. They emulate to be dynamic, so you can add new elements to a container in your code, but in runtime it's going to create a complete new container, and that's going to be to have penalization in the performance, and we are going to see that. Unique values, it means like if you insert, for example, the same string or the same type or object to a collection, they are going to accept it, all of them, but the set. The set is only accepting unique values. That's the particular characteristic that make them unique. Arrays is a C# object, and that's a benefit because they can be used for connecting with libraries, or even when you use libraries, you are going to receive arrays, and it's good to know them and to get used to work with them. And multi-dimensional, they are containers and arrays. You can have arrays of multiple dimensions. And containers, you can have a container made out of different containers, and so yeah, you can have multiple dimensions. I would say you cannot do it with lists and sets. And about the performance, this is what we are going to put into test today. So let's go for it. How I've made measures and the results and everything? Well, I've been using the trace parser. The trace parser is a tool where you can execute Dynamics code, and after that you use the trace to analyze the different performance and the call stack and everything. And what we do basically is to have the creation of n elements into a container, list, set, and array, and after that we read them. And with the trace parser, I get the time it took to them, and I make it in a scientific way. That means I am getting n measures for every, for example, for 100,000 elements. I make 6-7 measures, I take the average, and with that average I will be using that average with the standard deviation to calculate a quadratic adjust in order to see the behavior of the function, of how the time is increased with the elements, or with the number of elements. Let's start analyzing the time it takes to create or to add n elements, or to create a container with n elements. Here you can see how the tendency is quadratic. And that's very dangerous because it can take to your development to have very, very serious issues. So why is this happening? Well, this happens because containers are, as we said before, are actually immutable. So when you add a new element to your container made out of n elements, and you want to add a new element, in runtime what it does is basically create a new container, a whole new instance of a container with n plus 1 elements. So each time you add a new element, you are creating a complete whole new container with n plus 1. And that's what it makes it quadratic, because if you have n elements, you have created n different instances of an average of n halves elements. So it's n per n half being n the number of elements. That it's proportional to that. So it's quadratic, and that's why we shouldn't use containers if we can do the same using other collections. If we go to the other comparison, we can see how all of them are linear, so there's no massive differences. We can see how the set is the slower. Is the slower, so the time is the maximum, and that's because the set, as I said, is only allow unique values. So every time you insert a new value, it is dynamic, so we don't have the problem with like the containers, but it needs to loop through the set and check if that new value already existed in the set. Neither lists or arrays needs to do that, and so they are faster, but because they don't have that extra functionality. So what about reading? It's exactly the same. And the container, I didn't put the container here because it took so much time to create the container that I needed a lot of time. In order to read, I needed first to create the container and after that read them. And when we go to 400,000 records, the container was completely out, and I decided to stop taking the read of the container, because in order to read a container, you have to previously have created it. The read of the container was fine in terms of performance, but we are trying not to use a container for those numbers because of the creation. So in conclusion, the results are very, very in line with the documentation of Microsoft and the best practices, as it couldn't be other way. And we need to understand how important it is to know what we are doing or what we are using, and how important it is to know the four of the collections. Because if you don't mind if the list is going to be ordered or not, or even if you need to have those extra or those duplicated values, then don't use a set. If you need to, for example, you have a method in XPP, and in XPP we don't or we are not allowed to have more than one return value, then you have to use a container, and it's not a problem, because you are probably how many parameters are you going to give back in your method? Maybe 6, 7, 8. It's not a problem of performance. So those are the contexts where the container is very useful, and it's the only one that you can actually use. And if you are not going to have an integration with C#, maybe you don't have to use an array, and you can use directly a list. And that would be it. Every one of them are very important, and I encourage you to investigate more of them and get used to use all of them. with the purpose of being a better developer.